Well, the process of firing the large cannons on a ship is quite different than what the Army does in the field. And the first thing you've got to do, because it's a large gun, is the command is
Cast loose and provide!
And what you're actually doing those things. When you cast loose, you are unhooking the cannon from its lashings. It's triced to the bulkheads or the gunnels of the ship, depending on the deck that it's on. And you are providing, what you're doing is bringing the implements down to the deck so that they can be used in the cannon. And it's the preparation command for the gun and for the crew.
1, 2, heave! 1, 2, heave!
If the gun is in its normal position, if it's been triced up correctly, it should be in the position of run in, which means the muzzle is inside the ship. Again, whether it's a bulkhead or the gunnel, the side of the ship, if it's inside there. If not, you give the command to run in. And that's a process of putting the blocks on the proper rings on a carriage so that the crew can run the gun all the way to the back of the carriage. You're running it completely in so that you can use the implements and load the weapon. The next thing that we do is worm the piece, and that means taking one of the implements which has a screw, which is called the worm, and you run that down the tube to make sure that there's nothing in there. You don't want any piece in there that might become separate shrapnel. You don't want to load the weapon incorrectly. You don't want that round not going all the way into the tube so that it'll misfire or anything like that. You certainly don't want any embers in there. The next step should be to run the sponge down the tube, and again, that is to check on embers. On the first firing, we typically don't do that, but it should be done. Again, we're not firing a live round in this exercise. The next step is to advance the round, and this is where the powder monkey steps in and advances the round. The round is carried in a leather pass box, and the powder monkey shows the round to the gun captain to make sure that it is the proper round being called for, whether it's solid shot or whether it's a shell or so forth and so on. You want to make sure that everything is proper in that process. And then load, which is moving or advancing the round to the muzzle. And this is where the number one sponge man is advancing the rammer. Now the guy on the other side of the muzzle takes control of the round itself. It is dropped directly from the powder monkey's pass box into his hands. And without much movement is able to push the round just inside the muzzle of the piece. Now at this point, this man steps behind the trunnions, and this will be a safety position for him. The number one sponge then places his left hand on the muzzle of the gun. And this is an important safety step because this is dispelling static electricity. You don't want anything happening. So this is dispelling static electricity, and he takes the rammer and slings the round down the tube, and it's ramming the thing down. And it usually takes 2, 3, 4 times to do that to get the round all the way to the breech, all the way to the end of the tube. Once that happens, I'll give the command home, and he will remove the rammer. Now, throughout this whole process, the gun captain's standing above the tube and has what's called a thumb stall on his thumb. It's a leather covering, and he's putting that thumb stall over the vent, and that is a hole inside the cannon. You do this because as you're moving implements up and down the tube, you don't want air being sucked through there to ignite any embers that might be there. So that's the reason for that. Again, it's a very simple but necessary safety step. All right, once the number one sponge man is away from the muzzle, the round is loaded, what we're now going to do is run the gun out. This is the opposite of running the gun in. We're now running it out. And this is simply getting it out past either the gunnel or the bulkhead of the vessel. Once the gun is run out, the gun captain will then prime the weapon. And this is a process. The first step is to take a vent pick. It's a long metal piece, and you stick that vent pick through the vent, that hole in the cannon, and that punctures the bag of gunpowder that you have. Once you do that, you clear the vent pick, place it back into your belt, and depends on where the gun captain puts it now, you're going to hear the command to prime. The gun captain will reach into his pouch and pull out a friction primer and the halyard. Now the friction primer is a brass piece. It has fulminate of mercury in it, and it's got a thin wire coming out of it that's crimped and sealed inside there. You're going to place the friction primer in the vent with that brass tube sticking down. You're going to attach the halyard to it, and one of your crew is going to step forward and place his hand over the halyard to keep it in place so that the gun captain has the time to go to the rear of the gun and get in place. Now the gun captain directly behind the piece, he wants to get the halyard tight and is going to nod to the person holding the halyard tightly to the cannon. Is going to release that. At this point, the weapon is ready to fire. Now, the thing about combat on a ship, you're going to wait for your target to pass you, and you're going to fire. The gun captain pulls the halyard, and through this, he's going to give the command, ready, fire, and hopefully the gun crew will hear that. When the gun captain gives the command to ready, this means that the gun crew will separate their feet, take a step backwards away from the muzzle, lean back, drop their jaw, and put their hands over their ears. And this is so that you're not injured by the explosion that's going to happen inside the gun. This is a safety step just in case the gun explodes. As you're leaning back, it's going to blow you back instead of blowing you up, essentially. So it's a safety step there. So fire, pull the lanyard, and it discharges the weapon. And at that point, you've got actually two explosions. A tiny explosion of that halyard pulling that little metal wire inside the friction primer, and the friction primer goes off, sending an explosion down into the gunpowder. And at that point, the gunpowder will explode, sending your projectile down range.
Ready! Fire! Return to housing, pivot!